Hey YouTube, this might look familiar if you caught part one. If not, check it out. Here's the link to the first video, how I built this base, and the white material you see there is drywall spackling, like a joint compound that's pre-mixed basically. And I think it's a really cool product. I'd really appreciate if you guys let me know what you think about it, or check out the other video, or if you're not too interested in the jungle, let me know what kind of base you want to see. If it's maybe more of a forest or something with snow, but let me know in the comments. And meanwhile, I will try to explain to you my process for layering on different effects and paints and more leaf litter and jungle floor material. And the first step, as you can see, is just to get into those really deep shadows and get some black primer in there. The primer I'm using is just a basic Vallejo black primer, nothing fancy. You can use any black primer. You can probably at this point even just use regular black paint. I don't know that it necessarily has to be a primer, but some of my blackest blacks are primers, so it just happens to work out. Get into all the nooks and crannies. Basically, you just don't want any of the white spackling compound to show through. You don't want any of the rocks or the sand or even the leaves. The leaves might look like they're toned correctly, but at this point, we want everything to be a fairly solid base. We don't need to coat the entire thing. It's not necessary to get the entire thing covered in primer, because the follow-on layers, especially in the raised highlights, are going to stand out anyway. With that next layer, while we've got that coming up here, I'll mention it's not really important what colors you go with. It really, look at your reference pictures. Where are you trying to depict this scene? Is it more of an orange brown? Is it more of like a yellow tannish kind of a sandy color? Maybe gray. Don't just assume that it's probably just a burnt umber, or it's probably just some kind of flat earth brown color. I mean, it's could be, but at the same time, again, look at those reference pictures, and even if you've got an app like Photoshop or something on your phone that you can have a little eyedropper tool to come in and actually select certain spots and pick certain colors out, you'd be surprised that something you thought, oh, that's the ground, that's dirt, that's brown, you get that little eyedropper tool and it tells you the true color, and it winds up being maybe more of a sky gray or some kind of like a blue or a green tone in there that you weren't expecting, or farther into the yellow than it is actually into the red. The colors I happen to use, again, I just grabbed some out of my Vallejo Air paint rack. It's here, let me take a look real quick. Yeah, I was gonna say Iraqi sand, but it's actually a U.S. Desert Armour 686, and then a light brown. It's Vallejo Model Air 71027, and the sand, the ivory sand from Vallejo. It's RAL 1001 or Vallejo color number 71075. I mean, I'll put all this stuff in the description if you guys want, but again, it's really not the purpose of this video. I mean, you can use any colors for this. It's just happens to be the colors that I thought matched some of the pictures I was looking at. I wasn't trying to go for something that just looked brown. I wanted something to be a little more dusty, a little lighter in tone, kind of a more of a tan. Almost like a dirty khaki color, I guess. Now this is just a regular burnt umber wash. This section here may be a little thicker than others. It just depends on what kind of coverage I'm looking for, what kind of opacity I'm looking for, but it's just thinned down with water, and everything's right on top of the paper towel, so you can unload your brush before, during, doesn't really matter. Again, just at this point wanted to bring in a little bit of those warmer kind of red tones into the shadows, just to help add some saturation. And then I did hit it with the airbrush again with that same random mixture of Vallejo sands and tan colors, just to kind of dust things up a little bit and even everything out. And then it's back in with the burnt umber wash, and then I'll pick out some details here. What I'm using right now with the paintbrush, the detail brush, is right out of the airbrush cup, so this is truly what the color looked like, I guess, or as best as I can describe it. And I'm not doing this in an effort to frustrate anyone, so hopefully you guys aren't coming here looking for exact paint ratios. And the reason I don't give them is not because I'm trying to keep a secret or anything. I truly just mix colors until I think they look right, and if it's a little too yellow, maybe I add a little blue or a little brown, or just a little something to help bring it back into whatever color I'm looking for, and I don't keep track of ratios or number of drops along the way. I think it's easier just to find a color you want and then do your best to try to make that color from scratch. Or if you happen to have something right out of the bottle, that's even better. I will say burnt umber is always a great wash. If you just need something to throw in there and add some browns or some warm tones, burnt umber, raw umber, burnt sienna. I mean, any of those kind of traditional colors are always going to have their part to play. But ultimately, it's just about. I think the video is more about just showing the process. At this point, I've airbrushed in a couple colors. I've added a wash. I've added another airbrush layer. I'm doing some detail painting just to bring out the highlights. So pay attention to the different effects I go through, and then how many times I wind up doing the same effects. Not hopefully not going around in circles, but just to build the layers up slowly over time. And instead of trying to achieve all these effects at once, this has actually happened over the course of 2 days. Maybe 1 or 2 hours one day and then another 2 hours the next, and it's really just to help with the drying time in between. And then you have to give your eyes a break and just walk away from it, come back, see if it's still how you thought it was supposed to be, or if you had gone down the rabbit hole of maybe too many details being painted or too many washes. Here I'm just adding the color to the underside of these little tree branches or scrub brush or whatever, with the airbrush just coming in with that same tan color, just to make sure that these little branches are getting completely coated. But pay attention to how many times I go back to the same layers over and over again. It's not the same thickness. So the first time I airbrushed it, it was full opacity. Now we're doing it with thinner layers, and every layer after this is going to be thinner and thinner and thinner. Same thing with the detail painting. I'm laying on some thick paint with the detail brush. I'm doing thick washes. Later on it's going to be pin washes. It's going to be maybe just 1 or 2 details. I'll speed it up here. Most of this video is actually at least 2 times speed. I tried to record everything, and a lot of it's really just you're watching the same thing over and over again, so I'm not trying to bore you guys. But in addition to paying attention to the different steps I bounce back and forth with, also notice how often I'm spinning it around to view every side of it. I can see why those, for example, Tamiya turntables are really beneficial. Alright, we made it. Now this is a couple different Scenic products from the Scenic Factory. Link to their YouTube channel and their website in the description. I have noticed a few 404 errors though. I'm hoping the pandemic hasn't disrupted their business. Products are great and they last a long time, and through multiple projects. Basically the leaf litter is right here, and then the forest floor, kind of like a fall tone, orange forest floor mix. I just use Elmer's it's like Elmer's white glue, but they also make it clear, and even though the white glue usually does dry fairly clear, I just, better safe than sorry, I just use the clear stuff right out of the bottle. I don't dilute it necessarily, I just put it right onto the base, and then with a wet old brush that is really only good for something like this, I'll spread that glue around and kind of dilute it that way. Then sprinkling on the forest floor, the fall mix that's a little more orange there first. I'll just put that really on the horizontal surfaces, if that makes sense, right? So the base has a lot of kind of micro terrain, if you will. In other words, if you were to put the glue on there and it was fairly wet and it kind of immediately runs down like it's a little ravine or a hill or small gully, then it's probably not some place where a whole lot of leaves and twigs and sticks and scrap bush and whatever else is going to wind up staying. So I tend to just apply it on the flat horizontal surfaces. On the very deepest depressions, you can definitely build up a couple layers of this stuff, make it look like a whole lot of materials collected over time. And I'll go back and forth between the leaf litter and forest floor covering. They both offer unique coloring and texture. You can also use the brush to move it around, and if you are kind of moving it around and you get some stuck on your brush here like this, it's not a big deal. Your brush already has glue on it. You can just kind of wipe it around, stick it someplace else, and it'll wind up sticking there. Now, once it's all as dry as it's going to be, you can turn the base over and, tap it a couple times, let the excess fall off, and, recollect it, add a little more glue, a little more water, something to help it stick down, and just reapply whatever has fallen off, and keep at it until you're happy with it. If you still have stuff falling off after that, throw it out, do whatever you want with it, save it for later. but I don't think you necessarily have to spray down your whole base with isopropyl alcohol and a white glue mixture. I think this method works just fine, and then in the subsequent steps when you spray it with the airbrush and some more paint, anything that sticks at that point is definitely going to be locked down for good. So keep adding more of the same layers over and over again to build up these effects over time. Anyway, that's the gist of it. I'm going to go ahead and speed it way up at this point and add in a couple of twigs just to simulate fallen trees. You just snap them off at a desired length, pretty straightforward, glue them down, add a bunch of leaf litter and stuff around it to help seat it into the base. And we're back with the airbrush, and you might be thinking, at this point, why are we still airbrushing stuff? We've already done all these layers, but I think some of this is just a little too high contrast at this point, and this extra layer of earth and tone will help to make it seem like this layer of leaves has been there, maybe not as long as the original layer that at this point is all black and dusty brown, but it does make it look, I think, that it's been sitting there for a while and has already started to decompose. One of the last steps in the entire process is going to be adding in another layer of leaf litter that has not been toned with any of the earth colors. It's just going to be straight leaves as if they just fell in the previous season, and I think that will bring in that final level of contrast. So basically, instead of going to one extreme, you know, like a black base with white leaves, for example, you want to have a lot of different midtones. You want to have a lot of different grays. So as you build this up in different layers, just keep blending them. You know, the third layer isn't blended as much as the second layer. The fourth layer isn't blended as much as the third. You can do as many layers as you want, really, and just really build a very in-depth scene. Again, coming back through at this point with the highlight brush just to pick out some more details that might have gotten covered too much with the airbrush. It seems like a lot of back and forth. You have a lot of contrast and you tone it down to almost no contrast. You punch the contrast back up, but then you tone it back down. I mean, it's just, you're trying to find a balance, and you know, you might do some extreme steps right off the bat, and then every subsequent step after that is getting less and less and less extreme as a way of blending over time, as a way of blending over layers. So after picking out a few highlights that might have been toned down too far with the airbrush, I'm also going to grab the burnt umber that we've been using as a wash, and instead of treating it like an overall sludge wash this time over the entire base, I'm just going to use the same detail brush and almost treat it more like a pen wash, where I'm just pointing out certain details that I think might have lost that deeper shadow. And I'll re-emphasize again, I don't really place a high importance on specific colors or specific brands or anything like that. Acrylics, you know, are nicer for this stage because you can do wet on wet blending. It's really not too difficult to master that. They dry very quickly, especially when you're putting them on so thin, and you don't necessarily need it to be perfectly blended because a lot of the things that you're painting at this stage are either so small that you're painting the entire object, or they're so large that again you're blending it over time over different layers with different effects and leaf litter and sticks, and it's not necessary to get a smooth transition. Keep in mind too that there's, you know, no need to go through a certain number of steps. You could, you know, stop this and call it a day before you even add the second layer of leaves with the white glue. I mean, you can you know, just paint what you had originally and go from there. I mean, at this point, everything I've done and everything I will do for the whole video is just the kind of forest floor, the jungle floor, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is all dead vegetation, some scraggly brush material, some leaves, fallen trees, logs. I mean, it's all dead underbrush. This isn't even getting into the live vegetation. So if you're going to do a lot of live vegetation, you know, static grass, if you got a lot of different layers ahead, then maybe it's something, you know, you only put in a certain amount of time. And it's really up to you, the one doing the work, that you got to make that call. You know, what's the payoff versus what's the amount of effort and time that's put into this. I know there's a couple sayings out there like, for example, less is more, or oh, you should quit while you're ahead. And I will say There is certain moments where I'll think, oh, you know, should I really push it and do another layer of this or that? And every time I've decided to go one more step and one more layer and one more cycle of effects, I've never regretted it. I think it's always added to the finish. Less is more. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're trying to do, but I would also argue that more is the original more. Adding more layers and more effects, as long as it's in scale and realistic, and you've got the right tones and everything's blended in. I mean, is everyone going to see every single bit of every individual layer that you've put down? No, probably not. But you can never know on step one which parts are going to be visible by step 10, for example. I mean, there's just no way to tell. Oh, I should leave this section completely empty because I know no one's going to see this. I'll go ahead and slow it down and bring it to the camera here, and you can check it out. I think it's looking really cool, but I'm going to go ahead and pop back in again with that highlight brush. Now with a bit more of a light wood color, just to come into the dead trees, the logs, just to pick out some of the areas that have no bark and really make them kind of pop out more and stand out from the base just a little bit. Also coming in on just a few little random rocks here and there, or some of the branches on these different, whether they're dead or just out of season, I'm not sure, but the little sticks and twigs and things, and some more highlights, maybe the rocks. I mean, it's I guess another argument I've heard is that, well, I don't want to take away from the purpose of the base. I mean, the base is just there to show off, whether it's a figure or a tank or a diorama, whatever it is. The people don't want the base to overpower that display, and I understand that too. But the flip side is also true. If you have a base that just seems unnaturally barren or too planned out, too perfect. I mean, unless you're doing something that's a man-made garden, or maybe an urban setting where nothing's been damaged. It's just a regular street, or I don't know. I think sometimes you can have a base that isn't detailed enough, and you can have a really great figure, a really great tank or aircraft, whatever, and the base can detract from it just as much as it can potentially overpower it. I honestly think for some people, if they're focused so much on the figure and the base just seems right, they're not even paying attention to the base because it just blends into the background like any other photograph you might see of a person standing out in the woods or on a beach or wherever else. So a lot of people aren't going to focus on the individual grains of sand on the beach. They're going to be looking at the person. Are they smiling? Are they happy? Are they with somebody? What are they doing? I mean, it's you kind of want the base to be able to blend into the background, and so I understand why people might not want it to be too complex, but you still want it to be as natural as possible, because I think that will help kind of push it into the background if it just makes sense and seems to be realistic. Then people don't have to look around and say, well, why is this here? This doesn't make sense. Why is this like that? I mean, it's just if it makes sense, then they can just focus on the figure or the tank or whatever the actual focus should be. Anyway, guys, that's it for part 2 of this video. There will be a part 3. It's going to be on vegetation. I've figured out how to preserve it using glycerin. It's got another 5 or 6 days to soak. And then also, if you see this picture here, that's some AK Interactive laser cut stuff. So until then.